Tom?
All right, to me then, just so you know, a recording has started. My name is Tom Friend. I am a former military pilot, Navy or naval aviator and Air Force pilot. I've been in application development for about 25 years. Have been involved with the federal side and both the commercial side. But I bring to the table about 12 years of Agile, Scrum, and scaled Agile experience.
So let's go ahead and get started here. Let's start with the agenda here. This is probably going to really be a broad outline of what we'll talk about today. We'll go into a few more details than what are illustrated here. We'll talk a little bit about what agility is. Enterprise Agile case study we'll describe briefly. The notion of pivot or perish, that's a key notion. If you're taking notes, you want to start taking notes there. That's a key notion right there. And then we'll jump right into the notion of business agility to differentiate it from, let's say, IT agility, the notion that your entire business organization enterprise would be agile. And of course, what's key to that is, the power of alignment, being able to align your lean and agile projects with the business goals and objectives itself, with the market itself, with your customers, and that's a very, very powerful concept. Then we'll conclude with questions and answers. Of course, you can always type your questions into the Q&A dialog box as well. Tom? So let's just talk a little bit about the definition of agility. We won't spend a lot of time on here, but this is actually a very, very good definition by Jim Highsmith. Actually, one of the earliest, agile thinkers, dating back to the 1990s. He was part of the people that developed the Agile Manifesto, but he was an author before then. He really talks about a very, very simple definition of maximizing business value. And that's really, really key to start there rather than end there, with right-sized, just enough, and just-in-time processes and documentation. So we want to use, lean, agile, flexible, lightweight processes and documentation with an emphasis on discipline, because we want to do a high-quality job and we want to satisfy our customers. But our ultimate goal is not just being lean and agile, but to maximize, business value, the return on investment, or even intangibles like morale and customer satisfaction. And customer delight is a really, really key word in the lean and agile fields. If your customers are delighted, you're doing extremely well, and everybody's making money in the process. Next slide.
Well, let's talk a little bit about where the Agile movement came from, and agility in the context of what we understand right now. Really, Agile in software traces its origins to the early 1990s. Agile, as we know it now, was a response to a convergence of processing power, hardware processing power, and complexity of computer language, specifically object-oriented programming. At the time, there were a myriad of all these different methods and practices, and it was really difficult for everyone to make sense of it all. So in 2001, a bunch of software development leaders or thought leaders got together at Snowbird, a ski resort, to go skiing, eat barbecue, and talk about what binds them together. And what they came together, or the output of this, was the Agile Manifesto. And really, what the Agile Manifesto was values. And what they said is, we are uncovering better ways of developing software by doing it and helping others do it. And through this, we have come to value the following things: individuals and interactions over processes and tools, because it's about the relationship and the dialogue. Working software over comprehensive documentation, because guess what? Your customer is never going to see the documentation. It's an enabler to make working software. Customer collaboration over contract negotiation, because guess what? The contract can be wrong. And responding to change over following a plan, because the plan was created with what was known at the moment, but the objective changes, and you need to be able to adjust to meet that. They close by saying that they understand that there's value in the things on the right, but they value more the things on the left.
Okay, so that's a good lead into this next slide. Agile is really an ecosystem of many, many concepts, tools, practices, values, and principles, and methodologies and approaches, and the list continues to grow. It's really it's an umbrella, it's an ecosystem of many, many different concepts, really sort of kind of lean being at the top, and other key, contributors like extreme programming. We see the XP acronym, Kanban, which is a growing field, which really kind of comes out of lean. The Crystal methodology, Tom alluded to the notion that it grew out of object-oriented programming. That's where Crystal came from, and many, many of today's Agile practices. The Rational Unified Process, which was an industry blockbuster, a de facto industry standard in the 1990s. Concepts like Flex, which Tom will describe a little bit later. And of course, today, Scrum is the predominant Agile methodology worldwide. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but really 95% of global IT projects that are using Agile methods today choose to use Scrum. Next slide, please.
When you look at levels of agility within an organization, you go from individual through team, department, your hierarchy to that enterprise organization. Likewise, you can see that hierarchy from a perspective of how projects, or in Agile we say product, is ranked within how your teams address a particular problem. So this slide shows your levels of Agile and those Agile concepts that Dave talked about from the individual daily extreme programming, test-driven development, behavior-driven development, then to your teams and projects or products, your Scrum, your Agile practices, then to your programs and your portfolios where you're using Kanban and wrapping DevOps, using Scrum of Scrums to bring multiple teams together into alignment. And ultimately, you get up to an organization or enterprise level where you're using lean concepts, the plan, do, check, act, loops, your Kaizen. And what's very interesting, when you look at the high-level organization enterprise, the focus is reducing waste. Whereas when you look at the individual team and department, the focus is in creating value. These two things work hand in hand.
So that's really a good lead into this next sample right here, this next slide right here. Version 1 is a leading Agile, automation, solution provider and vendor. Actually, one of the top automated tool vendors, but they also do an annual survey. They've really been doing one for about 10 years, and really what they're identifying in these 4 bars is what motivates people to choose, lean and Agile methods? Why do people, what are they looking for? What are they trying to uncover? And it's really illustrated in these 5 bars. If you look at the top one that says 59%, most people come to Agile methods to accelerate product delivery. That is, reduce cycle time, reduce lead times, right? Because the key to market competitiveness and satisfying and delighting your customers and maximizing business value is to work fast. But we also emphasized earlier, we want to do a great job. Quality, reliability is also key. We're not going to sacrifice quality for speed. And if you see the second bar says managing changing priorities, right? Because over 80% of customer requirements exist as tacit knowledge. That is, they're not known at the beginning of the project, right? So if you document requirements in a plan and scope, in a schedule, and a Gantt chart, and a budget, what's going to happen as you incrementally eat the elephant and uncover the scope, the requirements are going to change. New requirements are going to emerge, and you need to be able to adapt to that new information as it emerges. Traditional methods don't give you that opportunity. And along the way, we're going to increase productivity. We're going to work faster. Again, doing a high-quality job. it's going to increase predictability, right? Because the notion is that if in traditional methods, we assume that 100% of the scope is known, but we already know that 80–90% of the scope won't be known until later in the project. So by eating the elephant one bite at a time, we're actually going to increase, outcome predictability. And then the ultimate goal, which is really aligned with this particular brief, is alignment. People want a methodology, a set of tools and values and practices that are aligned to the market itself, to the customers itself, to the business itself. We don't want IT developing technologies for technology's sake. We want IT focused very, very sharply, razor sharp, laser sharp. Every hour, every day, every week, every month is going to hit the bullseye. It's going to deliver a product with business value to end users and customers that are aligned with business objectives. Next slide.
So when you look at the Scrum framework from its overview, the Scrum framework is a framework for developing and sustaining complex projects where people can address complex adaptive problems, just like what Dave has been talking about. Scrum is lightweight. It's very simple to understand. What you see right here is your requirements in your backlog. Your requirements as they go into a sprint, a time box in which you work on them, an inspect and adapt cycle every 24 hours, and the outcome is a viable product increment that's potentially shippable. Within Scrum, there are 3 roles: a product owner, a Scrum Master, and a team. There are 5 events: sprint planning, the daily Scrum, a review, and a retrospective in which you inspect and adapt and make your process better and better. And the artifacts, those things that you have as documentation, are the backlog, the main list of requirements, your sprint backlog, and your product increment. And within that product increment, you have your burn down charts and your capacity and velocity as a outcome. Scrum is really not a technique for building process. It's a framework which you can employ lots of processes and techniques as a container. And I emphasize this because it's different from other methods and practices, because Scrum is a foundation or a scaffolding, where others, like Crystal or Rupp, is you have a whole bunch of stuff and you pick and choose what you want. The rules of Scrum are the things that bind the roles, the events, and the artifacts together. And that is the governance of the relationships and the interaction between them. When you look at risk and you look at value, what Scrum is trying to do is deliver the highest possible value at any one time. So when you bring requirements into your sprint through your sprint backlog, you want to ensure that they optimize business value, and in doing so, this mitigates risk to the business. That requires alignment. The chart that you see in front of you right now is a chart that came from the Standish report. You'll see a 7%, a 13%, and a 16% pie chart. What Standish said is that only 7% of features within a product are used all the time. Think about Microsoft Word or Excel. How much of those features on functions that are within that application do you really use? For me, I would say it's even less than 7%. What Scrum and Agile says, start by building those things that add value and never build the things that are never used, and stay away from those things that are seldom used. And in doing so, you maximize business value and output, and having transparency around that value ensures if your product is aligned with that business value, you are ensuring the highest output for your teams and your organization.
So let's go ahead and talk a little bit, very, very briefly, about the notion of comparing the details, comparing traditional waterfall big bang development, which many, many people are still using and trust and know and believe in, to what's below the blue line, which is sort of the agile methods that Tom has just described in the last 2 slides or so. So the notion was with Agile, and I think we've already alluded to this, is that you can know 100% of the scope in the beginning. You talk to a few customers, you examine a few documents, and you can identify a charter, a scope statement, requirements documents. You can identify all the requirements, do all the design, do all the coding, do all the testing, and all the deployment, sort of in a linear fashion. This is the notion of big batches or big batch. In Agile, we call it big design up front. In the manufacturing industry 30 or 40 years ago, they called that big batches. But the notion was, as Tom showed in the last slide, is that really over 95% of your requirement, that we've already suggested this, exists as tacit knowledge. They cannot be expressed as requirements or schedules or budgets. You sort of kind of have to uncover the scope, the real requirements a little bit of the time by incrementally showing your customers some working hardware and software a little bit at a time with real blinking lights. So the focus is on developing real working, software and hardware. Okay, real examples of, if you're in the training industry, real examples of training materials. And what you want to do, as it's shown in the lower part of this graph here, is you want to document just a little bit of the scope. You want to develop a little piece of the scope in the highest possible quality, and you show it to your customer, and you ask them, is this what you want? And your customers will sort of kind of give you a thumbs up or a thumbs down. And as you go from increment to increment every 2, 3, or 4 weeks, or sprint to sprint, or iteration to iteration, your customers will begin realizing, okay, what their real requirements are. So in a very short period of time, what's illustrated by in the Waterfall at the top, it takes many, many years to uncover what the real scope is. But in the Agile paradigm, what's illustrated by the length of the green bars on the bottom, is in a very, very short period of time, your customers will eventually tell you what they really want. And that's really what's described in this particular slide. Next slide, please.
What it really comes down to, what Dave is saying, is you're getting that value sooner. When you look at a graph of value to time, in traditional waterfall, with your big design up front, big batch, big bang, you get everything at the end. You also get all the risk associated with it. With Agile, you're getting the highest value up front, and it's incremental. And it's incremental through an iterative process. So each step along the way, you're getting value. So what happens if you run out of money right at the blue line? Well, guess what? You have 80% of your application, your product, out the door, and it's actually functioning, working software. You have likely a minimum viable product that meets a minimum feature set that has value to your customer, your client, your organization, your stakeholders. And this comes down to risk. So on the left, you look at Waterfall. At the end, you're testing and working on your working software. You're incurring a massive amount of risk because you haven't inspected and adapted, and you've created legacy technical debt and organizational debt that you bring with you, along with a lot of inefficiency. So when you look on the right to Agile, your risk diminishes exponentially. You're getting tested and working software in little bites. You're able to build upon that foundation, and in doing so, significantly reduce risk.
So that's really sort of where Scrum gets its name, this notion of rugby, right? The notion that people actually work together very, very closely, very, very tightly to move the ball down the field, the rugby ball down the field, right? And we saw this in the values, lots of individuals and interaction, lots of emphasis on teamwork, on small teams, very, very tightly integrated. Yes, we'll use processes and documentations and schedules and budget, but we're going to focus more on the relationships, on the conversations, because we've already said several times that over 80% of the real, true customer requirements exist as tacit knowledge, and the only way you're going to be able to uncover that incrementally is by talking to one another and communicating, just like this Scrum team. They're talking, they're moving, they're feeling, their arms are so tightly interlocked, they're feeling one another's movements, and they're working together as a team to incrementally move the rugby ball down the field and win the game, win the contest. And that's really where the notion of Scrum gets its name. And by doing so, as Tom showed, you're going to attack risk not just incrementally, but exponentially, right? You'll eventually be able to result in project success, delight your customers, satisfy them, maximize your return on investment, reduce your risk. All sorts of great benefits will emerge from using this paradigm. Next slide, please. So as we illustrated in the last slide of the notion of a team, high-performance teams are really sort of at the center of this paradigm, okay? But as Tuckman showed us many decades ago, right, teams sort of kind of go through a life cycle themselves. It's called forming, storming, norming, and performing. Every one of my teams does this. I just joined a brand new team about 5 months ago, and we went through this cycle, right? You form the team, sort of, they're storming, they're trying to get along with one another, they're sort of establishing boundaries and establishing a pecking order, and you're fighting over rules and practices. There's a lot of turbulence in that team. Productivity is a little low, as illustrated by the orange bar, right? Okay, then you begin what's called norming. You establish some rules, you establish some relationships, you establish a pecking order, you establish a hierarchy, and when you kind of get to the performing phase, then you're actually performing at a very high rate. You're delivering fast, you're talking to your customers, you're arguing less over rules and practices, your productivity is high, your quality. This is when you're really kind of cooking with gas and you're really optimizing. If you think of the old CMMI level 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, the notion of CMMI level 5 was you were optimizing, you were performing at the maximum level of productivity and quality. In a team, this actually happens very quickly. We actually see this happening in the first 3 sprints of Scrum. I see this, depending on the complexity, this could be a few weeks or this could be a couple of months, but eventually the teams will learn to get along and learn to work together and achieve their maximum level of productivity. It doesn't seem, it's always darkest before the dawn there, and that's that break point or the tipping point that Malcolm Gladwell talked about so many years ago. Next slide.
One of the things that we wanted to stress is that agility and agile so many times are associated with just software. Well, here's a case study of agile, Scrum in particular, being applied to a topic that is near and dear to Afterburner, which is fighter aviation. On the left-hand side, you see the F-35. The cost of the budget for the F-35 is $1.5 trillion. Currently, they're $143 billion over budget. It's delayed into 2022. The issue with the F-35, it is a classic waterfall, big design up front, big bang at the end. And you have multiple contractors aligning. They are focused around requirements, contract negotiation, and following a plan. On the right is the JAS-39. It costs the project a fraction of what the overruns are on the F-35. It has a total cost of $15 billion. What's amazing here is they have a new airframe and integrated system every 6 months. They have a test pilot on their Scrum teams with their system engineers and the people that are actually doing the work, bending metal. It is the world's most cost-effective military aircraft, according to Jane's Aviation Weekly. And it's not just the cost of creating these aircraft, it's the cost of maintaining them. The F-35 costs $31,000 a flight hour to put in the air. The JAS fighter costs $4,000 an hour to put in the air.
So that was a great slide. So let's just, that is perfect. So Agile did really primarily come from manufacturing and hardware, and then we sort of kind of adopted and took it over for the IT industry. Now it's kind of moving back into hardware. So great slide, but really to us, the sweet spot, the Goldilocks zone for the lean and Agile, paradigm is really global IT services, and banks are the perfect example of this. They're not the only example. We can think of Amazon, we can think of eBay, we can think of Yahoo, we can think of Google, Facebook, any global IT giant that has to satisfy billions of users simultaneously, 24 hours a day, 365 days a week. But banks are really sort of a sweet spot, like Bank of America, Citibank, Royal Bank, so forth and so on. We'll talk a little bit more about this on the next slide, but this is great idea. So what they can do is quickly move out of their document, their process, their organizational hierarchy. We're going to process this mortgage application one field at a time, and you have a different department for every square box on an application form, to the notion of let's automate this process. Let's put it online. Let's put it on your cell phone. People just go in there, type in their social security number, their address, and apply for a loan and get some money right away, right? And you get profit right away, and you develop small increments of business value. And if you don't have the right solution, you get out of the market or you try something else. So banks are really a perfect example of this. Next slide, please. And now we come to the FinTech example. This is a very busy slide, but focus your eyes on the center of the slide, FinTech. FinTech is the perfect example, of an organization that wants to use Agile methods. What they really are is a global conglomerate. They're an ecosystem. They're an ecosystem of ecosystems. We call this web services. Another term is microservices. The notion is they're actually a collection of companies, of acquisitions that perform a little piece of the pie, okay? One person might focus on lending, as we see up on the upper left, finance in the upper center, payments on the upper right. This could be cell phones, this could be computer types, Apple, Mac, this could be Europe, Africa, Latin America, Central America, North America, the Pacific Rim, China, India, Indochina, and the notion is that you have a service for all possible markets, and what you're doing is you're attacking a little bit of the scope of your total ecosystem, one service at a time. And by doing so, what the FinTech executive said, we couldn't use any other paradigm on the planet except Agile methods, except Scrum. No other paradigm that's ever been created allowed us to create such an elaborate, such a profitable ecosystem in record time that maximizes our profitability and maximizes our predictability and our delivery speed. Next slide, please. So what are we talking about? Business value. Business value is really a complex topic, but one of the fundamental ones is people are going to ask, what's the bottom line? What are the return on investment? What are the return on assets, right? So when we look at more traditional firms, and I'm actually dealing with a bank right now, that this bank has existed for a really long time. It's not on this list, so I don't want to throw any stones. They're actually they've actually created their first online banking service ever. And every time I call them, because I can't find the feature I need, no one in customer service has ever used their online banking before. And that's really what's sort of illustrated by the people down at the bottom. If you're still in the traditional brick and mortar mode, it's a manual process. Every field on that form is a different department, is a different database, is a different filing cabinet, has its own bureaucracy, its own territory. You're not going to be able to compete, and we'll talk a little bit more about this later. But if you're more of those top tier firms, and we've already mentioned this, the Amazons, the Googles, the Alibabas, where you're really automating, you're reducing the scope, you're breaking your complexity into multiple products, as we saw in the FinTech example, right? Okay. then what you're going to do is you're going to be able to maximize your return on assets, your return on investment, right? If I invest $10,000 or $1 million in one little microservice, let's say approving a loan, okay, a service for approving a loan, and I get that done in 2, 4, 6 weeks, I can immediately deploy out to billions of users of iPhones and Samsungs and various other smartphones an app for approving a loan, a web service, and I can immediately realize my business value and reduce my risk. And no other paradigm allows us to really maximize your return on investment. If you try to do the traditional method, the big design up front of I'm not going to deliver this whole very, very complex ecosystem for months or years, not only will you not get any return on investment, you'll probably be beaten out of the market, and we'll talk a little bit more about this in a minute. Next slide, please. So as we've said over and over again, this is what the banks are focusing on, right? It's not just discovering new markets, because there's a lot of new markets, but it's those that are, focusing on return on investment. So we see at the upper left, the low ROA, banks, like, I don't want to start naming names, but we see Wells Fargo and Citibank and HSBC and so forth and so on. We see the high ROA, banks up on the upper right hand, the Amazon payments and the PayBell, and then the no ROA, banks like, GM. Did you know that literally 80% of GM's, profits do not come from selling automobiles, and they have over 70, major platforms. All right, but GM actually makes the majority of its profits from lending, right? But most of that is not automated. It's not focused on web services. It's not focused on Agile, and they're really not getting any return on investment. So, despite the fact that GM's most profitable, business unit is their banking arm, they're going to be out of business very, very soon if they don't start focusing on web services, microservices, Scrum, agility. Next slide, please.
What all this comes down to is alignment. Organizational alignment leads to agility. In order to keep focus on a team, no matter how big or small, you have to be working together. At Afterburner, we call this long-range planning a high-definition destination. It's clear, it's crisp, and it provides purpose and clarity around what an organization is trying to accomplish and who and what that organization is. Organizational alignment is ensuring that everyone is on the same sheet of music, and this cascades down through the organization. So you start with a product vision, and that's a long-range plan, and bring that into a product roadmap. And we talk about product. It's not project, it's a product, because a product is a living, breathing entity that is supported by teams, stable teams. When you get down into tight planning in months, you have release plans and features and themes that you break down into small groups of functionality that you can work on and get out into the marketplace, so you realize that business value as quickly as possible. This alignment is vitally important in the current state of volatility and competitiveness, really, that you see in various markets, where emergence of cloud services and microservices, just what Dave was talking about, has created this whole new playing field where those companies that are able to leverage business agility, grabbing those microservices, bringing them together, not building everything, but consolidating, and being able to bring out a service based on those building blocks, it's speed to market, and this is a critical leverage point, and they're pulling ahead of their market competitors. Those that don't are going to perish.
So let's just talk a little bit about this notion of a capability maturity model. So we all are familiar with software CMM and CMMI from the 1980s and the 1990s and even into the 2000s, still a very, very dominant global paradigm. But we also see the notion of agile maturity models. If you go out and Google or Yahoo, whatever your favorite search engine is, agile maturity model, you'll see dozens of them, right? So the early focus of Agile methods from about 2000 to about 2009 was on teams. How do I make a single development team Agile? Okay, but at risk there is what Tom just talked about on the previous slide is lack of business alignment. I had people in Manhattan working for Fortune 500 firms saying, I just got my team Agile, but my organization is bureaucratic, and so my team isn't aligned to my executives aren't aligned to my team, so that's really low maturity. And then we started talking about the notion of Agile at scale. Well, how do we scale this to projects, to multiple teams, to multiple projects, to programs, to portfolios? And that was sort of the middle, right? From about 2007 to about 2015, there was a focus on, okay, let's do multiple teams. How do we make if we're going to build a large ecosystem like FinTech, I'm going to need more than one team using Scrum, and I'm going to need to do it without resorting to traditional methods and slowing down again and getting beaten out of the market, right? But the notion now, as you see by that orange bar from about last year, 2015 to 2016, is, okay, let's make sure the team is Agile, but let's make sure that multiple teams and projects and programs and portfolios are Agile, but that the entire business is Agile. Just like my friends in Wall Street a decade ago who were complaining that their teams were using Scrum, but their businesses were dog slow. Well, the focus now is how do we make the whole business Agile, right? And if your executives can't think in an Agile, if you can't plan, if you can't organize, if you can't prioritize, if you can't fund, if you can't execute your business in an Agile manner, you're not going to survive. And so we see a level of maturity or progression. Today's businesses are moving out of the model of, great, my web services team is Agile. Now we're talking about my whole business like FinTech is Agile. All of Amazon is Agile. All of Google, all of Yahoo, all of eBay, all of Facebook. We no longer live in a day and age where just a database team, just a GUI team, just the middleware team, can be Agile. Your entire business has to be Agile in order to realize, the ROA, the ROI, the business value, the survivability. It comes down to survivability and global domination. It's really what we're talking about here today. Next slide, please. So as Albert Einstein, he has many, many quotes, but this is actually a very, very good quote by Albert Einstein. He says, if you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough. And that's really, really an important concept because that's what we've been trying to do is we've been trying to illustrate the simplicity of and the power of the Agile paradigm. And we see that Scrum, as simple as it is, provides us a framework to allow us to scale to the business level. Next slide, please.
When you look at that simplicity, and many times the teams within an organization being Agile, embracing Scrum or other frameworks, XP, but the business not being able to plug in, that's where the flawless execution, plan, brief, execute, debrief cycle really adds value. It's on the business, technology, alignment side. Flawless execution is the most nimble, responsive, and non-intrusive of all the practices and frameworks under that Agile umbrella that Dave walked us through. It has 2 roles, 3 events, and 2 artifacts. Because of this elegance and minimalist approach, it provides flexibility. Flex that can coordinate and align departments, programs, functional areas, customers, and pretty much any other group that needs to work together with a common, simplistic vocabulary to get a shared mental model with simple ground rules that provide guardrails to keep them on track and keep the conversations going. It's the plan, organize, and prioritize that Dave was talking about 2 slides ago. When you look at it, though, the beauty of flawless execution, Flex, and the alignment that comes with it, it's both simple from a framework and from a practices perspective. It allows you centralized planning to give your vertical alignment through the hierarchy of an organization, and then it adapts into a decentralized execution to respond to threats and seize opportunities in a very dynamic, adaptive business world. Now, this decentralization of execution is a real key characteristic of agility because it's the empowerment of teams. Those with the most up-to-date information and closest to the issues make the decisions in the fastest and most responsive manner because they know what's going on. They're not waiting to be told what to do. Those organizations that can master both the organizational alignment and that empowerment and decentralized execution ultimately gain business agility throughout their entire organization, which is going to give them that competitive edge in a volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous business world. And with that, I'd like to open it up for questions. I did have a couple that already came through. So if you have any questions, please put them into the window. And I will start with the first question. Dave, to you. What are some of the examples of business goals and objectives, verticals, that you can apply Agile and Scrum to?
So what are some of the business? Well, obviously, you can do this to a number of things. We've already talked about those, whether they're web services or microservices. It could be training. It could be business development. It could be manufacturing, advertising. It could be marketing. It could be any variety. Even global relationships, global brokering, any number. So what you want to do is start out with some sort of, strategic, global objectives. Well, I want to provide fast online, financial services for high-risk businesses. Well, that's a great vision. You can apply that. I want to provide just-in-time training in arithmetic, algebra, and calculus, pre-calculus for at-risk students that they can do at home on their iPads or their iPhones. That's a nice business objective. I myself, as I mentioned before, have used it for business development, where we actually did this to RFPs. We actually used Scrum. We developed a product backlog of business development objectives. We actually created a sprint plan. We started working off each of our user stories one at a time, delivering parts of that business proposal to red teams and to customers until they started telling us what their real needs were, and then we started delivering, winning business proposals that eventually scaled from just a couple of people to literally over 200 people doing $500 million worth of business per year. So you start out small and you grow really, really big, and that's what this paradigm is all about.
Thanks, Dave. Appreciate it and the insights. So I'm going to take the next question. The question is, my group only has around 10 team members. Can I begin using Agile on just my team? And I would say emphatically yes. That's the ideal size for a team. Maybe a little large by a couple of people, but yes, within a small team, that's where you're going to get your effective self-organization. And you start off with exposure, knowledge, education, and then with a small project, and you can beta test that, taking something that's easily measurable and not a large part of a bigger project, but something simple, something that you can quantify, something within a long enough time box that you can create blocks, sprints that you can deliver incrementally, and teach your team to go through that Tuckman model and get to a point of performing based on their inspect and adapt cycle, what they learn in context of your own organization. All right, Dave, here's one for you that just came in. What is a good way to introduce Agile to my executive team?
That's actually a classic example. So there are a variety of methods. Actually, if you email Tom in Afterburner, he actually has a little white paper, and it talks about a variety of methods. But let's just talk a little bit about some of them today. So elevator speeches are very, very powerful, right? And that's a tried and true method. You just get an audience with an executive in an elevator, in a coffee break, in an office, and just pitch the Scrum. We can do more with less. We can help you achieve your business objectives with this paradigm. You can do a formal briefing, a formal pitch. You can do a white paper. You can do training. You can expose them to other executives. You can invite them to a talk. I think one of the most effective methods is just do it. Just using the Nike, just do it. Just get your team. Show that your team is doing a good job. If you start doing a good job, you're gonna raise your executive ire, right? So there's classic tried and true. In the old days, when I say old days, 10 or 20 years ago, the onus was on the developers to convince the executives to use Agile methods. Now, many executives are learning about this at executive conferences and magazines and newspapers, because Scrum is just all over the media, and they're actually coming back to the teams, the development teams themselves, and saying, stop being traditional, start being Agile. This is the case at the Social Security Administration, which is not only one of the biggest government agencies on the planet. They have over $1 trillion budget, right? But the most traditional, the slowest, the most archaic organization ever imaginable, or at least one of them, probably at least in the top 5. And now you have their executives saying, speed up, stop being traditional, stop being waterfall. So more and more the challenge is not so much to convince executives as the challenge is the executives convincing the organization. And the truth is it's top down, it's middle out, and it's bottom up, and you have to do all 3 at the same time, and just be patient and just do a good job. Focus on doing a good job. You're going to win hearts, minds, bodies, and soul by just doing a good job, talking less and doing more. Next question, please.
Well, Dave, we are at the end of our time box, so I would like to say thank you for joining us and sharing your experiences from your practice. And if there are any other questions or comments, feedback, please reach out via the Afterburner website. We'll be sending a follow-up survey and a link to some LinkedIn groups for additional information. Now that said, everyone, thanks again for joining us, and have a marvelous afternoon. Take care. Thanks, Dave.
Thank you.